30th meeting of the Belvedere Finance Committee. Helga, can you call roll? Here.
Patrick Fader,
Here.
David Walker,
Here.
Will Lyon,
Here.
John Wilton,
Yeah.
Vice Mayor Wilkinson,
Present.
and Councilmember Mark.
Here, thank you.
Helga Cotter, Director of Administrative Services, and Robert Zadnik, City Manager.
Great, thank you, Helga. First item of business is an open forum. Robert, do we have anyone online from the public? Okay, let me know if someone comes on, otherwise we'll skip asking that for the agenda item. Second agenda item, discussion and possible action regarding the semi-annual review of the city's investments. Helga?
So thank you, Chair McCaskill and committee. This item is the semi-annual review of the city's investments per our policy. The Crowd Trust Liquidity Fund earned over $115,000 in interest from January to March 2025, totaling $330,000 in earnings for the fiscal year to date. In January 2025, with the approval of the Finance Committee Chair, the $153,000 in the short-term fund was moved to the liquidity fund to benefit from a slightly higher yield and a more stable net asset value. Currently, all of the city's funds are in the liquidity fund, which offers the most stable investment option during the current volatile market conditions. Vice Mayor Wilkinson, committee member Will Lyon, and I review the investments at the end of each quarter and recommend any changes to Chair McCaskill for his approval per the investment policy. As of the quarter ending March 31st, we recommend no changes to the CalTrust allocation since the liquidity fund is stable and the yield is very close to that of the short-term fund. And with that, staff would be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee or comments? Hearing none, is there an action item we need to do for this?
No, Will, did you want to jump in there?
I'm happy to. I can't say it any better though than you said it, which is, the yield's pretty close on the liquidity fund. It's slightly below the short term. I think the only other context I'd add is there's two variables at play. One is the yield and one is the price of the fund. And to Helga's point, she says stable, and that's true of a money market fund that has a stable $1 net asset value. If we shift into a investment fund like short term, that has a floating value. So then that has you looking, all right, well, in addition to the yield, how does the price come into play and which of those two variables is more valuable? And just shorthand, I took the current market value of what we have invested, which is close to $10 million, and said, if we picked up, an extra 0.04% or 4 basis points, what would that benefit us? And that would benefit us ballpark like $4,000. Whereas if the price of the fund moved by a penny, that would impact us by close to $10,000. So that tells you that price is the dominant variable here. And so the point is to have that surety of having a stable net asset value in a year when we're going to be depleting, quite a bit for all the expenses that we went through in the budget. It seems like it's a good trade-off for the time being. If that gap's out wide, we'll make a change. But I think for the time being, we're, adequately balancing getting return with the risk.
So price is dominant as long as yields are close.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a crossover point,
That's
but
right.
even still, we want, it's
Yeah.
possible that the price changes significantly, and it
Absolutely.
did back in 2022.
Yeah.
And so, if we're in a really squirrely environment here, we will take the stable net asset value and take the 4.4%. That's pretty darn good. And
Yeah.
it is beating a lot of stocks right now. So.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So Chair, there's no action on this item. It's just for you to receive the.
Any further questions or comments? If not,
I had just
Yes.
two comments that
on the memo, it refers to locking in higher, longer-term interest rates. But with these commingled funds that are valued to market, you don't really lock in the interest rates. I'm questioning that use of that term. Because if you had, as we all know, if you had a hold to maturity dedicated laddered
100%.
portfolio, then you could lock it
It's
in.
floating.
But you can't,
Right.
that's kind of the point here. You
Right.
can't lock them in here.
Right, that's correct.
All right. And then one other comment, just it kind of relates to this disaster and analysis and things like that. The 115 trust, and this is getting technical, but it says these funds are not available for the city's ongoing operating costs. And actually, you can use those funds for current pension costs. And the reason I think that that's sort of key here is if you did have a major loss of current revenue, you could use these funds as another sort of disaster relief area in having them pay your current pension costs and
So maybe,
assisting-
maybe a better wording would say these funds are restricted for use to pay for pension costs.
perfect.
Yeah.
And obviously, our intent is not to draw them, but to fully fund the liability.
Yep.
But in a significant disaster, you have to think of other things too.
Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, we'll move on to the third agenda item, discussion and possible action regarding insurance for the city's levies.
So thank you, Chair. I'll turn this one over to Robert Zadnik.
Yes, and thanks. Chair McCaskill and Helga, appreciate that. At the Finance Committee's request, staff spent time over the last year looking into insurance options for protecting our levees on San Rafael Avenue and Beach Road against earthquake damage. The report details that staff and committee member Walker initially explored traditional earthquake insurance through our current broker, which is CIRA. During that process, we confirmed that the levies are specifically excluded from our existing policy. And after engaging both domestic and international markets, only one insurer provided a quote, which was about $150,000 annually for limited coverage of $3 million, which included a significant 15% deductible. Expanding coverage beyond that to adequately protect our levies, roughly half the total cost of the levies, would cost around $1.9 million per year, which I think most can agree is clearly cost prohibitive for our limited budget. I'll point out that this was an informed quote. We provide the insurer with Stetson's technical assessments of the levees and soil conditions, which factored into their risk analysis and quoted premium. We also explored parametric insurance, which is a newer category of insurance whereby payments are triggered automatically based on earthquake intensity, regardless of actual levee damage. Again, it was found to be an expensive alternative at nearly twice the cost of traditional insurance. During this process, some questions did come up about FEMA's role in disaster recovery funding. We were initially told that those agencies which insure infrastructure would see faster reimbursement, but after doing some digging, we actually found the opposite was true. Having insurance on their levies could delay FEMA's reimbursement and reduce the net benefit from federal assistance, given that FEMA only covers uninsured losses after insurance settlements are finalized. We've been discussing earthquake insurance, but we also researched flood insurance a bit. It's a similar story that insuring the levee structures against damage from flooding is very costly, again, to the risk factors associated with the FEMA flood zones in these low-lying areas. Ultimately, staff concluded that both traditional and parametric insurance options are cost prohibitive under current market conditions, which is true for most agencies, most other cities out there. Our recommended approach is to continue to invest in our levee maintenance while simultaneously keeping detailed records of any inspections of these structures. It's probable that FEMA will be tightening its purse strings going forward, so I think this is now doubly important. And, in tandem, we will, of course, continue to seek state and federal grants for maintenance projects and for larger projects that are difficult to fund. So that summarizes the staff report. I'm happy to take questions, Helga as well. And I know David Walker and Sally Wilkinson as well spent time on this, so thank you.
questions or comments?
Well, I think I asked for this. I wanted to thank everyone for doing the work. I read the memo. It's in my mind, pretty conclusive. Agree with the conclusions. I repeat what I said last meeting is that I think it would be important to communicate the findings to the population of Belvedere. You know, that we've done the work, we've looked at options, particularly in the context of losing the vote on increasing, getting a tax to pay for it proactively, so that if something happened, people would know that the town council and the finance committee are proactively looking for options, and they're prohibitively expensive. And I like the point about FEMA and your point about if we claimed, we'd have to prove that we've done maintenance, which would support the project that we have on the books, because it's sort of double whammy. One, if we don't do it, it's not good. But two, we would not qualify, or we'd have more of an argument with FEMA. So I think there's important public message. But I want to thank you for the work.
Other comments? I'd probably like to add to John's comments. David, thank you for pushing us for this. Even though turns out it's nothing we're going to do, I think it's incredibly important that we have looked at it, documented, and I actually agree with your comments, John. If there's a way to get the ARC to mention this in some type of report or other, I think it might be worthwhile to do that. Only slightly unrelated question, and I apologize if this information has already been shared with us, but do we carry earthquake insurance on this building?
Yes.
Okay, good. Are there other questions or comments? If not, I think we've reached the end of our agenda, unless there's any other business that anyone wants to raise at this point. Helga?
I do have a couple things. From our last meeting, there was a question about, the funding if a natural disaster occurred. And so I gave everyone a copy of our findings on that. And just to give a brief overview, local governments do suffer significant property tax revenue losses due to temporary reassessments of damaged properties under Revenue and Taxation Code Sections 170 and 194. Also, Assembly Bill 1500 extended the rebuilding window from 2 to 5 years and allows local governments to apply for partial state reimbursement of lost revenue. Although this support is neither automatic nor guaranteed, and it depends on the legislative appropriations at the state level. State and federal aid, such as from Cal OES and FEMA, support emergency response and infrastructure recovery, but does not compensate for long-term revenue shortfalls. As a result, local agencies must rely on strong reserves, prudent financial management, and potential measures like issuing bonds or enacting temporary taxes to maintain services during multi-year recoveries. And then I also had one more thing. So at the last meeting, there was a kind of a discussion on the health insurance and the costs of that. And so I just wanted to give the committee some details. The city does offer a stipend for employees enrolled in a spouse or other source of medical insurance. It is currently $250 per month if covering one or more family members, or $175 per month for employee-only coverage. And also the health insurance costs, notably increased from 24 to 25 due to premium hikes across our plans. There was a 9% for Kaiser, 5% for PORAC, 12% for this PERS Platinum, and 13% for the Western Specialty plans. And the dental plan had a 3% increase. And during the 25 open enrollment, there was a shift in employee enrollment from the lower cost Blue Shield Access HMO plan to the higher cost PERS Platinum PPO plan. And additionally, few members are waiving coverage. Only one currently waives coverage now, where we had 3 in prior years. And when we do budget, for vacant positions, we assume the highest cost plan using the PERS Platinum family rate. And that way we assure that we have adequate funding. And, this time next year, we'll be in negotiations as our existing MOUs are ending as of June 30th, 2026. And we'll be in the budget process again, and we'll be able to provide more details on the insurance at that time to the committee in the fall.
One of the questions, was it not that we would at some point look and see what we do compared to other cities in Marin?
And that's what we're going to bring back in the fall.
Okay, good.
Do you want to just expand on the work that you're doing more broadly in terms of comps and everything, so to explain how it's within the context of all of that?
Yeah, so we're starting a classification study because all the most of the job descriptions are not up to date for our current staff. And then we'll probably move into doing a compensation study that we're hoping to have finalized in the early fall. And part of that will look at salary and benefits, and then we'll compare to other agencies as well.
Questions or comments from the committee?
I didn't have a question or a comment on that one, but I did on the question of the impact on finances of disasters, because I know, David, you sort of asked that within the context of, are our reserves at an appropriate level or are they not? And that's, sort of sticking your finger in the air, but we've had broadly this policy for a long time. And I just did a quick bit of research just to see what's normal in California, what goals there are and so forth. And so the state obviously has some very problematic formulas right now, but the Legislative Affairs Office is recommending a 50% reserve at the state level. Obviously theirs is, has very different factors than ours in terms of what's appropriate and what's not, and they'll probably never get to that level, but that's what's being proposed. And within local governments within California, we do have a very high level of reserves as a share of operating expenses. And I think the general recommendations are something around 20-25%, but we are unusual in that the size of the assets that we might have to repair vis-a-vis the size of our budget are so much larger that it would seem that a reserve at the level that we're at or even higher, in my mind, would be more appropriate than when you're looking at a city with billions and billions of dollars. The cost of physical asset destruction through natural disasters is obviously not quite so burdensome as it would be for us.
My recollection is there used to only be one other city in Marin that was at the 50% level. Do we know if that's still true?
No, I don't know.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
I was going to say, so interestingly, I can't remember who it was, but there are various research entities that sort of rank cities in California according to the level of their reserves. But for some reason, anyway, their formulas are just weird and apples and oranges, and we actually don't rank highly on that measure at all, which is kind of ironic. But we are,
Because we use a different base. than
just
they do.
weird things like they're then looking at they're reading it straight off your balance sheet, and so how you're provisioning for pensions and a whole bunch of other stuff messes
Well,
things
also,
up.
I
as well.
assume fire coverage is different.
Right.
since-
It definitely isn't an apples for apples, but we're sort of halfway down the ranking type thing. But compared with the rest of Marin, we are high.
Yeah, thank you. I would agree with everything that you said and found through that research. So it's somewhat arbitrary, but it's at the higher end, and there's a reason for it being at the higher end with the infrastructure. And, after a decade or more of no interest rates, now that you can actually earn 4 or 5%, having those reserves, they're not just wasted they're not like insurance premiums. If we have 10 million in reserves, we might make 450,000 in dividends and interest. And I think we have 190,000 in investment income in the 25-26 draft budget.
Right.
So there's, the reserves are doing something while they're there. as well.
Yeah. And the other thing that might move things obviously is if the recommendation from LAFCO is that, and we agree to annexation, our required reserves would drop by about $1 million because we wouldn't have fire in our, so the reserve right now is including fire, and we wouldn't have that expense, and we have to fund 50% of that, roughly 2 million. So we'd be dropping $1 million out of our reserve requirement. But what we don't know, if we're moving forward with that, whether we're going to be required to make some kind of payment to cover any anything with Tiburon Fire Protection District to make that happen. So there may be money to play around with, there may not. There's lots of potential changes, but that's just one of those.
Thank you.
Any further items we wish to discuss today? Hearing none, I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, Helga. Robert.
Thank you.